We share these streets. True tales of everyday folk in bygone Nottingham. Episode 2. Carole with an E. In Nottingham, on a Saturday afternoon, you can spot something you don't see in many other busy cities. There'll be lots of young people with ice skate bags slung over their shoulders. There's a strong tradition of ice skating in Nottingham. Torvill and Dean are the most famous of the city's skaters, but there are many who go along on Saturdays with no hope of ever winning Olympic gold, who just enjoy the hobby and go to be with their mates. The chippies and fried chicken shops in Hockley are awash with groups of young people and families out for skating on a Saturday. Now we have the National Ice Centre, but there have been a few skating rinks over the decades for both ice and roller skates. The first was opened in December 1875 when the Talbot Palace of Varieties on Market Street was converted into the Alexandra skating rink. This was short-lived and less than a year later appears to have moved to Talbot Street on the site of what would become Rock City. On the same street, the Marble skating rink opened on the corner of Stanley Place in 1877. In the early 1900s there was the Princess skating rink on Castle Boulevard, opposite the old waterworks buildings, which is still there. One ice skating rink, however, far outlived the others and is still fondly remembered. It's the one replaced by the current National Ice Centre. The original building was simply known as Nottingham Ice Stadium and stood from 1939 to 2000. Torvill and Dean practised there, and it was the home of Nottingham Panthers ice hockey team from their formation in 1946 through to disbanding in 1960. Panthers rose again in 1980, and the Nottingham Ice Stadium was their home again until it closed in 2000. The old building covered most of the current Bolero Square and the southwest corner of the Nottingham Arena concert venue. Aside from local heroes Torvill and Dean, I'm hard-pressed to think of any other local skating legends. I know Chick Zanuck was a heart-throb Panthers player in the late 40s and 50s. He had 11 incredible years at the club, but he wasn't local, he was from Canada. So this became our mission. We delved into the archives to find a skating legend. In the Nottingham Evening Post on Friday, June the 6th, 1947, there was a public notice in the classified section announcing that 4 pupils had been successful in the Children's Royal Academy of Dance examinations. Among the 4 was Carole, written with an E, who had passed grade 2 with honours. It was a fairly low-key mention in the newspaper, but in context was amazing. Carole was born in 1939, the year Nottingham Ice Stadium opened. Her parents were Edward and Amy, and they lived in Woodthorpe at 50 Arno Vale Road. Aged 10 months, Carole was stricken with pneumonia, which stayed with her for 2 years. Their home was fitted with an oxygen tent to assist Carole with her breathing. The couple understandably feared for their daughter's life. By the age of 4, Carole was off the critical list. She was still weak from the pneumonia, and together the family sought hobbies to help her exercise and mix with other youngsters. She began ballet lessons and excelled. The classified advert about the Royal Academy of Dance examinations was from Carole's ballet school. A few years later she was offered a scholarship at the prestigious Sadler's Wells, but declined to focus on her other hobby, ice skating. Carole's dad Edward recalls that, as a break from ballet, he'd borrowed a pair of ice skates one day and headed off to Nottingham Ice Stadium with his daughter, just like so many people before and since. Carole was a natural. Edward described his daughter stepping onto the ice and immediately beginning skating. It would be easy to dismiss this as fatherly pride after such a fraught childhood, if not for the fact that Carole had many other fans and achieved so much at a very young age in skating. A few months after the Grade 2 dance examinations, she appeared in a Christmas pantomime on ice, staged by pupils at the ice stadium. Carole, then 9 years old, was reported in the Nottingham Journal as playing the part of a fairy queen. The article casually says that Carole is hailed as a future champion of England. About a year later there was an international gala at the ice stadium. The headline cast included Miss Aja Vrzavina, the champion of Czechoslovakia, and 2 individual skaters from Finland. Carole is listed just below them in the advert for the gala, and in brackets is the description, Nottingham's Wonder Child. By this time Carole and her parents were still in Woodthorpe at 14 Pattison Road. On Saturday the 26th of March 1949, a crowd of nearly 3,000 attended a gala at the Nottingham Ice Stadium. Miss Vrzavina was performing again and was now not just the Czechoslovakian champion, but also the world champion. There were a host of other skaters from around the globe scheduled to perform, including the Swedish ice skating film star May Britt. May would later go on to marry Sammy Davis Jr., but in 1949 was just 16 years old. In the days leading up to the gala, she contracted a bad case of flu and had to pull out, meaning a spot was open on the bill. Like a plot from a Hollywood movie, that empty spot was awarded to local girl Carole, who received emphatic praise in the newspapers for her performance. The Nottingham Journal said, "This young girl put everything she knew into her display, which must have been one of the best she has given." The article featured an intriguing description of Carole. It said, "One of Nottingham's juvenile stars who has just finished making her second film." Carole at the time was 10 or 11 years old and she'd been in 2 films. When I was 11, most people I knew had a couple of swimming proficiency badges or maybe a yellow belt in judo. There was no other information in the article about these 2 films, and an internet search also proved fruitless. Carole's mum and dad decided that a move down south would be necessary, though their families cautioned against it. They sold Edward's estate agent business, their house and car, and moved to Lark Hall Rise in Clapham. Streatham Ice Arena became Carole's home stadium. She practised from 8 a.m. each day until 12:30, whilst several hours each afternoon were spent in academic study with a tutor. In 1952, Carole came second in the Junior Figure Skating Championship in Brighton. In November of the same year, she won the Southern Regional Championship as well as 4th place in the Senior International at Richmond. In March 1953, Carole came first in the Women's Amateur Junior Figure Skating Championship of Great Britain. This was held at Nottingham Ice Stadium, and it makes me wonder if Carole succeeded partially because it's where she'd learned to skate. Could there be a psychological home advantage factor in skating as there is in so many team sports? Carole scored 601.2 out of a possible 696 points to claim the top spot. The other side of ice skating, beyond the competitions, is showbiz. It seems that this is where Carole saw her future. In 1954 she was the principal female skater in Time Marches On, an ambitious production in Morecambe that depicted the various stages of life for an individual from childhood and beyond. One scene featured a representation of a dog show, although it's not clear if the poochers wore skates. I like to think that they did. Showbiz newspaper The Stage said Carole and her male counterpart reach perfection in the ease with which they execute the most intricate and dexterous revolutions. Ice dance in those days was something spectacular and otherworldly. It was a skill many of the crowd could appreciate, as they would have taken their own faltering steps at local ice rinks, so could only imagine how one goes from that to the speed and acrobatics on display at a show. Carole with an E seems to disappear from the limelight for a short while, likely as a result of a change in her home life. In 1958, aged 19, she married a man named Harold in Wandsworth. She vanishes from the armchair historian radar for a few years, but then it seems resurfaces with some television work in Australia, appearing in a TV play called The Chinese Wall in 1963. By 1966 she was back in Britain, appearing alongside Jeremy Brett, Joss Ackland and Brian Blessed in the Musketeers TV show, and in 1968 alongside Peter Cushing in a now lost episode of Sherlock Holmes. We lose sight of Carole the nearer we get to the present day. There are sightings on social media and rumours of sightings. We sent out a few messages, a nice way of saying that we cyberstalked some people, but so far have heard nothing decisive back. Mum Amy may have moved back to Basford in her later years, but nothing was definite. When I see the excited skaters around the National Ice Centre on a Saturday afternoon, or the hyped-up crowd before a Panthers match, it makes me a bit sad that the old building and the memory of Carole seem to have been forgotten so readily. Next time you're at that end of town, maybe you'll do what I do and picture a shining blue heritage plaque up on the wall that celebrates a local youngster who defied a life-threatening illness whilst in her cot and went on to master ballet and ice skating, travel around the world and become a TV actor. Nottingham's wonder child. Carole, with an E.